us on Facebook.com/faith in whatever. You can find me on Twitter at Josh_Carmen, Garrett at TStudentLife, James at JamesYuile, it's a misery, and Chris at Marion Ranch. Garrett was in charge of our religion topic this week, so I'm pretty excited to see what you've brought up for us. Wasn't really ready to expect it, but...
So today I'd like to talk about this delicious IPA that I have from Bootleggers, and we can also talk about Christians and drinking. Or
was this an excuse to get booze on the podcast?
Maybe. This is a delicious rustic rye IPA from a local brewery here in Fullerton, California. I have yet to have a Bootlegger, so I'm pretty excited about it. So James and I are going to have some because your stance on alcohol is a little bit more complicated than James or I. So you can. Why don't we start with you, Josh, as we talk about Christians and drinking, and we've got some verses we can talk about when the Bible talks about drinking and get people's different perspectives.
Yeah, I am pretty whatever
Cheers.
on the subject. I just don't like the way alcohol tastes. I think beer makes me sick. I don't like it. I just don't drink. It doesn't really bother me when people do drink.
I guess that's not complicated.
No, not at all. It's just kind of laissez-faire about it.
But right now you're not having.
I don't drink anymore, and I'm totally okay with that. I'll put it this way. I guess here's my ultimate stance on it. Nothing good has ever come from drinking. Nothing bad has ever come from not drinking. So that's just kind of the way that I adopted there. It's not.
I would disagree with that.
It's not necessarily, and we're talking about over drinking, and I'm not talking about. There's been times where you.
Well, I think we need to clarify when we talk about those
that's
things.
probably a good idea. There's obviously Jesus drank. His first public miracle was turning water into wine, of which a superior quality, right? That they know.
It was
John
bomb wine.
2. Yeah, he makes the banquet master makes the joke, right? Typically, people bring the best wine first and then wait till people get hammered and then they bring out the crappy wine, but you've saved the best for last, Jesus said. So, or they said to Jesus. And so I think at the very least that is something that we can see where Jesus says it's not a big deal if you drink. I think we've been far too legalistic probably as a church about it. But for me in my own life, I come from a family that has struggled with alcoholism, not my immediate family, but we've seen that on both sides of that. And so I don't like the taste. So it just ends up being a pretty easy issue for me. But I do have friends like you guys who love to go to craft breweries and really get into the whole scene of making beer. I have plenty of friends that make their own beer. I think that's cool, and I think it is. So I would actually retract my former statement. I think there can be good that has come from it. I have, had great conversations with people who would never step foot in a church, but they would meet me in a bar there, and we've been able to talk about good stuff.
Right. It can help fellowship.
Yeah, but
I don't mean fellowship like in the church. I just mean that there's nothing particularly like sacramental or holy about alcohol that I can think of. But there's nothing wrong with having a good time with friends, too.
Yeah, and there's value in that.
Right.
And so if you drink, great. I mean, I think, of course, everything we talk about in moderation, right?
Exactly.
And that was even something that you see true of kind of like...
Drunkenness is a problem
is terrible.
in the New Testament.
Yes.
I mean, if you want the biblical view, you'd be hard-pressed to make a real strong argument against alcohol, but you can make a real strong argument against drunkenness.
Right.
So is it a moderation debate? Is it the ability for people to moderate? Let me give an example. I've been a part of, we'll get into some church polity a little bit, but I've been a part of different churches, and they have different policies for their staff when it comes to drinking.
Right.
I find that a little interesting because you're in this almost exclusively in this one area, some specific group of people are making decisions, lifestyle decisions for other people.
Yeah.
Well,
there's sometimes a concern to make sure your staff is above reproach, right? I can see why you would want that for your pastoral staff.
And I'm okay with that.
I don't know if I'm okay with that. I mean, isn't above reproach showing you have the ability to live in moderation with something that you've given freedom to do?
I see the other side too, for sure. I'm saying both sides have an argument. I would be, if I was on a pastoral staff and then that was sprung on me as a new rule, I might be upset about it. But if that church told me about that rule
Going
in
in.
the hiring process, well, now it's my decision.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think it puts people's, the thing I struggle with is it puts different people's ability to handle their ability to moderate something like alcohol. And of course, there's people are predisposed to alcoholism and things like that. But I find it interesting when churches make those calls for their leadership, not trusting whether or not you'll make the right choice to begin with.
right.
So I'll give an example. A quick area of discussion is I'm a part of a Facebook group on Facebook for youth pastors, and there's over 5,000 people, and it's kind of a strange. I mean, you just see people can post whatever they want, and it's an open group. And even though they try to avoid debates, people will come in and say things like, "So, what's your view on homosexuality?" Not trying to debate, but I just want to hear what it is, and just
Gigantic debate ensues.
ridiculous, right? And so this drinking one comes up, it seems like weekly, right? Of do you think it's okay to drink or not? As a pastor or a leader of students, and from the outsider, I mean, I'm part of the group. I'm opinionated, but from the outside, it looks fairly split, 50-50. But each side feels like that the other side is the smaller viewpoint. So those who go, oh yeah, I don't think pastors should drink, staff shouldn't drink, and by the way, I think it takes gross. They're surprised when there's just one or two of the people who think it's okay to drink. While on the other side, those who drink think that the other side is really naive, and they even make jokes about, hey, let's drink right now, and so it seems to be pretty ingrained into these sides and what they think is okay. But it comes, like I said, it comes back to a moderation question. Those who are saying that you shouldn't are saying because even though drinking is okay biblically, very few of them are able to make the debate that you cannot drink at all.
Well,
What they're saying is control, self-control debate.
Let's put out a fact right now. Almost everybody has been
I'm
hurt.
awesome.
Yeah, no. Almost everybody has been hurt by alcohol directly or indirectly. Either somebody who is drunk did something to you or to somebody you love, or because of drunkenness, something terrible happened in your family or to a very special friend. And that reality sometimes sets the tone of these conversations. And you got to just sort of acknowledge that there is that side to this.
Right.
And so, even though I say that there isn't a strong biblical precedent to go after to push complete soberness, that you can never drink, right? There is the practical reality of life that we all have been affected one way or the other deeply by alcohol, and I can see how that sets a certain precedent. There's also a lot of sociology, or not sociology, but social science involved in this. For example, and this is a bit of a generalization, but it is historically accurate for one segment of America. So during 19th century America in parts of the South where the Church of Christ denomination and the Baptist denomination sort of developed. Church of Christ wouldn't like being called a denomination, but it is.
It's a non-denominational denomination.
Exactly. What was happening is a lot of these
agree.
types of churches in the South were existing in very poor places, and sort of a lot of these small towns had one saloon that was making a lot of money, and it was a very licentious place,
Run by the pastor.
and had and of course there was lots of drinking, and so that becomes the one. That becomes the one social center for all sin, is what ends up. And since drinking is a major part of that
It's the
particular,
lubricant.
And pianos.
right? Yeah, exactly. Church of Christ becomes very uncomfortable with music
good catch.
because music is
good point.
in this particular social context. Music is always in the saloons, and but drinking is too, and it's the major factor in those places. And so it creates a sort of identity that all the sinful people go to these places, and if you want to be a church holy person, then you avoid them. And then that kind of sticks to us, to our identity as Christians, and sort of undergirds Puritanism. And moving forward, now we have a discussion like this one.
Well, let me ask you, do you think that, you mentioned stuff that was almost hundreds of years ago, do you think there's a shift? Let me give you an example. A church that I visited when I lived in Michigan, Westwind Church, started offering a Sunday night service, but instead of having it on campus, which they had a nice, beautiful campus, fairly close to town, instead they offered it in a new brewery in town, which the brewery had a fairly good size kind of banquet room.
Did they make wine?
Sorry. They served wine, probably, wine and beer. And the restaurant did not close for the church because the restaurant was still open, but basically in a separate, fairly large area, they would hold Sunday night service and encourage families to purchase whatever type of food or beverages they would like while service is going on. So do you think, my question to both of you guys, do you think there's room for a change of mindset, for a shift in thinking when it comes to drinking and outreach?
I think so. Let me admit my bias in this conversation, and there's nothing wrong with admitting your biases. I was raised for a good part of my childhood by my father. My parents divorced when I was fairly young, and I lived with my mother for a little bit, then with my father for quite a bit, and then my mother before I finished high school. So during that time, I lived with my father. My father's Scottish, very Scottish in many ways, accent and everything. Raised, born, everything in Scotland, came to America later in life. Wonderful man, a great teacher of my life. And being very Scottish, culturally so, drinks, still does. But I never, I can't think of times in my life when I'd say he irresponsibly drank. And in fact, something, sort of a hallmark of my childhood is my father being quite open with me, quite transparent with me about
That's so helpful.
about drinking, and talking to me about it, and even saying at times, so we're at somebody's house, he's had drinks, and he says, you know what, I didn't go crazy, but I had one too many, and so we're gonna stay here. We're gonna spend the night. So get comfortable on the couch, and it's all right. It's the weekend. We'll hang out here and have a good time, and then we'll go home in the morning, or maybe if it was early in the day, we'll just hang out until it's a good time to drive, whatever.
Right.
And my father was transparent and not ashamed of that, and he was smart about it, and always showed me that there's a way to handle this maturely and also cautiously and have a good time.
So important.
It's a topic of teaching that you should teach your children about this topic of alcohol and drinking.
I would sure love the church to be like my dad in that way with this topic. Instead of overreacting, showing a maturity and saying that there can be a place for this in life, treat it maturely. If you go a little bit too far, make sure you don't drive anywhere. Make sure you make smart decisions. You don't let the alcohol make bad decisions for you.
Uber,
yes. So that's my bias. I've been raised that way, and so and I don't come to my pastoral ministry now afraid of alcohol, because I wasn't. I had a wonderful example growing up of a person who handled alcohol for all of its best reasons. He had a good time. He displayed a way to enjoy it without letting it harm himself or anybody else. And so that's kind of what I want, both for raising my children and also for handling the situation pastorally. Now, let's say I had a father who was an alcoholic and made a lot of really bad decisions and harmed me one way or another because of decisions based on alcohol.
Right.
I would come to this conversation with a different bias, and I need to acknowledge that in this and not mute the other side. Sure. And that's important too. I kind of wish we had somebody here that could really talk from that side to balance out this conversation a bit more, but we don't. But it's good to admit our biases.
What do you think, Chris?
Just for fun.
Sure.
What would you say the benefits of alcohol are? You said your father enjoyed the benefits.
Well, I mean, it's
the good parts of alcohol.
Alcohol comes both with a different flavor sets, so you can enjoy the flavors of it. Some of the best drinks ever made with the best complex flavors are alcohol-based drinks, right? So there's that side of it, the flavor side. There's also the side of it. It relaxes you at the end of a tough day, maybe. It helps you get into a joyous mood to have a good time with people you love.
So you'd say it's a benefit that it alters your state of mind?
Yeah. Chris is trying to make a point silently right now.
No, I'm trying not to go too far down that road because it's easy to make an argument about anything we enjoy alters our state of mind.
Right.
But and just to admit my own bias and thoughts on the matter, I really couldn't care less about people having a drink or two. I do agree drunkenness is a problem. I don't drink anymore. I don't miss it. But going back to your thoughts on being of sober mind, and how do you decide where that line is? And just because you're happy or you feel good or relaxed or more sociable, does that excuse that you're still not of a sober mind? If that makes sense there. I don't know.
Well, yeah. When I say, well, let me put it this way. Now, this is where we're heading deep into interpretation, and I could be interpreting things wrong. Okay, so like I have to admit here that this is like second level interpretation. What
But
does
and just to be clear, I'm just throwing this out because everyone here agrees.
right? But when
Somebody's
when I
gotta say
say
something.
So nobody cares.
when the Bible speaks against drunkenness, here's how I interpret it. But it's a very intuitive interpretation. I can't like say, well, let's do some word studies.
Right.
Let's go back to some Greek
Some
whatever.
blood alcohol levels.
That's okay.
Right.
I can.
I think that these are terms that represent blatant alcoholism, right? And we that when the Bible's discussing drunkenness, there isn't a term for alcoholic in that culture and context, and these terms are related
it's
to that.
alcoholios.
So here's some facts. Here are some facts. You can turn to there's a book edited by Richard Rohrbaugh, and I think it's called The Social Sciences in the New Testament. And in one of the chapters, each chapter is written by a different social scientist, very well educated social scientists. And one of them talks about sort of the daily lives of people, and it makes this point: the average Greco-Roman Near Eastern person, the 1,800 calories per day that they got, 25% of those calories, do the math, I'm not sure, that's 450 calories. 450 calories per day came from alcohol. And this includes Christians and Jews. That this whole, and so daily there was a pretty hefty amount of alcohol. Now there's reason for that. There's a practical reason, which is water was poison in the ancient world.
Right.
Poison for many reasons. First of all, they just didn't know much about microbes and
Well, and
bacteria.
that stayed a truth pretty much all the way up until fairly recently, really.
Right. But what they knew was adding alcohol, drinking alcohol didn't make me sick to my stomach if I was moderate with it, right?
Right.
Whereas drinking water would give me dysentery or something like that.
Right.
So it's safer to drink alcohol than to drink water in the ancient world until the science catches up and can understand why.
Right.
That's reason number one. Reason number two, it's also because it was fun.
And their alcohol wasn't as strong. It wasn't as
That's the
concentrated,
claim
was that
made. I'm
right?
not so sure that's true.
I've heard
Is
that.
true?
I'm not really. I mean, that might be true, but what is it? Let's say it's half as strong. Let's say it's a quarter as strong. I mean, but if you drink 7 of them or
Right.
6 of them,
We also know that
They
they
would
would
have to drink 24 of them to equal
Right.
what we're.
Well,
If it's 1/24
I've
as
never
strong?
seen. I've heard that from pastors.
Yeah, I don't know
I've
if
never
that's
seen
true or
that in
not.
any hard
Yeah.
evidence sort of situation. But let's say it's true. What I can also say is I've seen evidence that drinking was an all-day matter as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
But part of that, but it's nutritious. That was the other reason that there's nutrition in alcohol. Remember, many peasants in this world are living on bread and maybe some vegetable, and not having a very robust diet as far as vitamins go. And alcohol comes with a certain amount of nutrition with it. Also, another reason why alcohol is very important in the ancient world is that it's very cold in the ancient world. There's no heaters.
Right.
There's no insulation. Some people live outside, and that's freezing cold at night. And some people live inside, and it's still really cold. Well, alcohol makes you feel warm, right? Scientists doctors will tell you
and
that
fuzzy.
it doesn't really warm you up.
it doesn't warm you up, but it makes you feel warm, and that's good enough if you're stuck in the cold.
Right.
So there's reasons for all this heavy drinking in the ancient world, but what I don't. So what we see is the practical reality that Christians and Jews drank on a daily basis. What we also see is there is an imperative not to fall into drunkenness, which I would probably interpret here as very blatant alcoholism, in which your personality and your life is significantly affected due to alcohol
Consumption.
And that's the type of thing to me that falls into not even really being a Christian principle necessarily.
Sure.
Right. That's
Right.
just
Right.
Everybody.
Yeah,
puts that.
everybody pretty much
Yeah.
can agree that if you're a drunk, you're going to have more problems in life.
Well, and we keep in mind where the main verse that gets quoted with that, right? And that's Ephesians 5:18.
Right,
Do
I have
not-
it right here.
Go ahead and read it for
And
us.
do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit.
Right, and so that's the light, right? When Paul, assume it's Paul who's writing Ephesians, writes this letter, the idea is what we're supposed to be as spirit people, right? Earlier in that chapter, he talks about avoiding things for the sake of the fact that that's not how God's holy people act. And so
Right.
that's important to keep in mind as well, that alcohol consumption is no big deal there. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. Let's because somebody's saying, you see, Paul said that, but Paul also took of the communion, and that was
Which we clearly know was grape juice and has been for 200 years.
no, it was wine. It was wine.
Grape juice was poison.
And the
So-
advice to Timothy.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what? So
Timothy,
whatever
1 Timothy
Paul
5:23.
means, and he can mean many things, but whatever he means, you have to also take into regard that the communion, the Lord's Supper,
Yeah, absolutely.
these had wine in them. So he didn't mean never drink it. Period.
Right, and it's getting at the heart of not letting yourself be defined by anything that is antithetical to falling under the category of God's holy
There's
people.
even part of my education in grad school is I learned how to read Sahidic Coptic, and we read a lot
You
of
too? You did that also?
and we read a lot of
What is that? My
so
grad school
weird.
doesn't teach me that.
It's a
Or the definition
It was
of
a
I was doing it as a hobby.
it's a
I
written
did practice
script.
Coptic with him for a while as a hobby.
It's a written script
terrible.
that was used in the Egyptian area, and it's a very complicated thing. But essentially, think of it as an Egyptian language.
Hey, by the way,
And-
can
well,
I,
hang on, let me
can I
make the point.
congratulate you?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so James passed his second master's thesis defense this last Sunday. I'm sorry,
for
last
my
Wednesday.
thesis defense for my second master's.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, there
Kind
we
of
go.
your first one or second.
And
but-
so it's his second master's
Congratulations.
degree. And so we now have a 2 master degree Yule there. So he's a second degree black
Thank you
belt.
very much.
It
It was as scary as people say.
Yeah, so congratulations on that. Sorry to interrupt. That's not.
So-
I know that's
so-
not like me.
So anyway, the point I was getting to is Sahidic Coptic is most useful for reading monastic texts, monks' writings in that region of the world, which is what I read mostly. There's other texts too, but we read a lot of monastic texts about monks and the life of monks. Now we think of monks, especially Egyptian monks, who are very ascetic, right? In fact, the word ascesis is pretty much an Egyptian word.
Define what ascetic means.
Punishing your body daily for the sake of your faith. So not eating, fasting, physically punishing in other ways, doing things that are physically strenuous. You can kind of define asceticism. It can be something that's more passive where you're not eating. It
Could
can
it-
be something more...
like a vow of silence. Would that be an example?
yeah, I mean, it'd be part of asceticism.
So
but
it's
the idea is,
withdrawing from the things of the physical for the sake of the spiritual.
yeah, think of it, probably a basic definition would be disciplining yourself for faith and
Yeah.
for faith reasons. But what is the discipline? Fill in the blank. So these very ascetic monks
Drinking.
disciplining themselves very much. Well, some of them, for the sake of funding the monastery, they brewed.
Right.
And these were like hardcore Christian
Isn't
ascetics.
like the most recovered thing that we have from the monastic period wine receipts?
Yeah, actually, that's in archaeology. We talked about this once. In archaeology of the Egyptian area, the thing that we have thousands and thousands and thousands of is wine receipts in monasteries.
That's how you learn the language, basically, is translating wine receipts.
Right.
And Codex Sinaiticus as well, strangely
Right.
enough.
And so this, I think, if we're speaking biblically, if we're speaking early church, that there isn't necessarily the same problem with alcohol as we interpret now.
Right.
There's certainly
Right.
there's some great monastic stories about why monks shouldn't get drunk. Now, that's not that they shouldn't drink; they shouldn't get drunk. There's one story that ends, the monks get the new fruit of the vine of that year, the new brew, and they drink, and they're like, hey, where's George, whatever his name was? And they look around, they can't find him. They go outside of the monastery. And this is like an ancient monastic text telling the story. They go outside the monastery, they look on the roof, and he's dancing on the roof of the monastery. Then he breaks through the monastery roof, ruining the sanctuary, and then like maybe killing himself. I can't remember if that's how it ended. And it's sort of that's why you don't drink too much when you're a monk, because you're not eating enough, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't don't drink. The whole monastery was drinking. It was that don't drink too much.
And
That's
I guess
the thing.
that's the difference there. And this is one of those things that we'll have certainly the freedom to do. But I mean, when we look
I
at
got one more question for you guys because you're all church leaders, so maybe you can answer this. In our culture, we do look at alcohol differently, being descended from Puritans mostly, right?
Right.
As opposed to Europe, where they're much more open about these sorts of things.
where
They
they're
kicked
all
us out.
probably alcoholics.
Yeah.
Functioning alcoholics.
So if you knew as church leaders that you drinking and drinking publicly could cause even one member of your congregations to stumble, would you be willing to give up alcohol?
Yeah, it depends on how we're defining stumble. If you say if stumble means get offended,
Well, I didn't want to define it because then it would be too easy to answer.
but no, I think it's not an easy to answer anyway. But if stumble is get offended, I would say that there isn't a religious imperative there, because offense is just offense. If it harms the person's faith, damages their faith, and there is a context where that can happen. You have let's say you do a Bible study, and then a bunch of you after the Bible study go out for a brew afterward, and then somebody enters your Bible study who has a long history with alcoholism. That there's a situation there where that person's faith can be damaged in a numerous
The pressure
ways.
to go along with you and not miss out on the
What about you?
fellowship.
What about you,
Right.
Garrett? How would you handle that?
Are you finished with your?
So I'd say, and
Yeah,
I
I'll answer
say
that.
when the person can be damaged, faith or otherwise, that's when you have a moral Christian religious
But
imperative.
what if you don't
No.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's where you really got to know. You have to get to know your flock.
Yeah.
In that sense.
I think it's not a very sustainable model to not drink in public because it may damages someone's faith. I mean, I think more conversations need to happen with those kind of people, because even if you stop for that sake, that you not drinking isn't necessarily going to be the one thing that saves this person's faith in the future, because they could see someone else drink and have the exact same effect on their faith. So I think you need to go a lot deeper than that, and if you could make a guarantee, like your question proposes, that would that damage someone's faith, then sure. I mean, alcohol to me is not something I'm spiritually connected to. It's much more of the craft and the flavor, and not even
The
the
subculture, really.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Not even the feeling so much that it's kind of a foodie type thing, and I'm into that kind
You
of
are
things.
a foodie type guy.
So none of those
Foodie or
are
fruity?
more important to me than someone.
Well,
that I
I'll just
care
give
about's
a quick
faith.
example. It's not a direct apples to apples, so it's not entirely fair. But I don't want to embarrass him too much. But our dad, a couple years ago,
He doesn't listen to this podcast.
he
it's
bought a
fine.
car. Right. Yeah, we were over there at CarMax. He's picking out a car. And
A car, man?
my dad
CarMax.
very much believes
Stop
in
it.
this idea of living so
Extravagantly.
no in such a way that there's never a question of any kind of impropriety or
above reproach.
yeah, and he really holds to that.
To
in
like
everything
the
he
nth
does.
degree.
Yeah. And so he had to trade in his Jeep. His knees were getting bad, and getting in and out was
I
kind
love
of a
that Jeep.
pain. And so
Sick.
he sits down. I say, "Hey, Dad, check out this car." And it's a 2010 Ford Taurus. And this was in, 2014?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a used car.
13.
It's a used four-door sedan. Not extravagant by...
That is not a nice car.
I like
Oh,
it.
it's a decent car, but
Yeah,
it's not.
but it's not like a
luxurious.
BMW. There's nothing luxurious about it. It's got power windows. Maybe that's it. And
Air conditioning?
My dad really likes it, and it's really comfortable, which as you get older gets more and more important.
Yes.
But he said, I'm worried it's too nice, and it gives the wrong impression of what a pastor is and how
Which
a
is
pastor
strange
is
because
spending his
the
money.
TJ was way nicer there with the tricked out
But
aftermarket stuff.
He's concerned
sick.
about the image he's representing, I guess, as a pastor, as a leader of the church. And he doesn't want to be seen as somebody who's taking the church's money and doing this,
Right.
Spending it all on cars and that sort of thing. And I think that's part of why never in my life have I ever seen him had a drink. Because
I did trick him into drinking once.
tricked him.
Well,
I'm not
and
What a
kidding.
good son.
Yeah.
And then
That was a pretty
part of
bad
that
day.
was we're in
It's
the
probably better you
Philippines.
don't
It's
drink,
very
Josh.
traditional and very Catholic, and
Right.
bars tend to be places more like
Yeah.
you were talking about
Revelry.
historically. Yeah, and but there's just no one could ever accuse my dad of being drunk at any point because he doesn't drink. He
Yeah.
hasn't had a drink in I don't know how long.
To round out this explanation of your father, he's a good guy too. Like it sometimes we explain such a person, and what one imagines is somebody who's really stuck up and really stiff and
Right.
and all these like overly righteous qualities.
Yeah, you wouldn't
Your
know.
father's a great guy to have a conversation
Yeah, so
with.
these are very
Jim.
private things, and
Yeah.
that's why he would never talk about this himself. But
Right.
this is kind of turnabout for all the sermon illustrations I've been in.
Well, let me answer your question, and it's probably one of the reasons why we're drinking right now on this podcast. For the same reason that your father,
Not all of us, just for the record. I'm not.
that your guys'
Just
father
12 of us.
was worried about the image it would have on him as a pastor. I think in a new generation, especially reaching millennials, I think sometimes, in some cases, showing that Christians can responsibly drink and enjoy alcoholic beverages goes a
Responsibly,
long way.
yeah.
It goes a long way into speaking about not just the freedom, but that what Christ really means to us is more important than these things, but we can still enjoy them. And I think that might speak to maybe not so much that your father's
Not to the
generation.
boomers generation. No, you're right. You're right there. But
Yeah, especially
also,
as an American in his
and-
time.
to be fair, most of the people that I talk to because for me, as I've gotten older and gotten more wise, I've tried to adapt the same approach. So in response to that actual question, I would just stop, even at the level of offense. For me, that would be the cutoff. Now, as I've been able to grow, kind of and mature in faith and just non-stupidity.
Well, you can make
with
any
that.
personal
And-
choice you
Yeah,
want.
yeah,
but
yeah,
I mean,
and
where's
that's
the
all.
religious imperative?
Yeah, and so I think you were correct with the idea of where the religious imperative actually lies, because when Paul talks about not being a stumbling block, the idea of that term, right, carries with it the understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's like almost irreparably harming their faith. to
it gets in
point
the way of the gospel.
Yeah, and so,
in them.
but on a personal thing, I think there's most of the people that I've talked to, while that's true, right, being able to have a beer shows millennials this value of being able to say, look, we can drink and not abuse it. The majority of people I've also talked to on the same side of that, the other side of that same coin is just, I don't really care. If you drink,
Yeah.
fine. If not, fine. Just don't be a jerk about it one
Yeah.
way or the other.
It seems like there's a larger question, which we're not going to cover, but just to throw it
Let's
out there.
cover it.
It's this, that we all have something we struggle with, and you need to be able to honestly recognize what your struggle is and deal with that
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
Alcohol has never been a thing I've ever struggled with, meaning I'll go months without thinking about it once and not have a drink. And then I'll go to somebody's birthday party or go to a wedding or something, and then, I'll have this drink because it was offered to me or it's just there. And then I'll
Right,
be like,
right.
oh yeah, I haven't had a drink in forever. It's not something that's ever on my mind or something I struggle with. There are things I struggle with. Let's be honest, food. Maybe there's a moral imperative for me to lose weight and to deal more moderately with my eating. And I think there's a visual proof of that. And I need to be honest with myself about that and to do well by my children, by extending my life, by making smart decisions for myself.
I could train you.
But
That's
and
a
there
very
are
good point.
Yeah, and there are people for whom alcohol is something they should avoid.
Right.
And it's a lot harder to see that.
Yeah.
Too. And
Maybe
so-
if you know them personally and the people that they. So one of the things that for me is that I've never struggled with it either, but I've also made sure that I surround myself with people who.
I thought your nickname was Fat Garrett.
I mean, did I say
So fat.
No, I mean drinking.
I want to take all the weight off me and guarantee that it gets onto Garrett.
You want to punish
He-
him?
That sounds
He's too
terrible.
good.
Too. I
He's
want
too
to. I
good.
want to
He's
do the
too
same
good
thing. All
looking.
of my
That
weight and
sounds
put it on
terrible.
him.
Look at his perfect smile.
He does have a perfect smile. It's seriously true.
Dreamy.
No, but I mean,
I
like,
had a dream that I was licking your teeth the other day.
that's
That's
really,
disgusting.
That's really. And on that note,
He's the one that's not had a
No,
drink.
That's also true.
like James, I haven't really struggled with it. You know, I'll go weeks and months without thinking about it. I really only like a few kinds of craft beer. If someone offers me a domestic beer, or I have no interest in drinking a Natty Light or Miller Light or Coors Light. I just would rather have water. you know?
Nobody wants to drink a Natty Light.
That's the wine that they were talking about that is saved
Everyone
after
drinks it.
everybody gets drunk.
But one of the things that I guess the last thing I want to talk about is this is also a social thing that we need to be aware. And one of the reasons that I Alcoholism is fairly common in my family, but I've made sure that I've surrounded myself with people who would not allow me for this to become an issue. They would not encourage drinking or encourage over drinking or encourage drunkenness. And I see a lot of my Christian brothers and sisters who surround themselves with those kind of influential people in their life. And 1 or 2 nights out ends up to every week a few nights out. It ends up to every weekend. Now they're drinking and getting drunk every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And no one in their life other than maybe a few people who they've no longer talked to is discouraging that.
Right.
As opposed to everyone is actually encouraging that. So I think we need to be aware of who we let influence us, and that can really affect the things that we struggle with.
Well, very good. So feel free, again, if you have any agreeing thoughts or disagreeing thoughts that you would like to share, leave them in the comments below, or send us an email and let us know, yell at us, whatever you think is good.
We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, we'd love to be able to have that conversation on a bigger level. So find us on facebook.com/faithandwhatever, or the iTunes podcast app. You can find us there, or on your Android podcast app, whichever one you use. I don't know why there's so many. You should just get an iPhone and have one. Yeah, so we will connect with you soon.